The mission of our Construction Hoist Council is to represent, promote, and enhance the construction hoist segment of the access industry with an emphasis on safety, training, and education for the benefit of members, the public, and the access industry at large. Our Construction Hoist Council is chaired by Mr. Eric Schmidt of Century Elevators and his co-chair, Mr. Shannon Beekman of Fracco Products. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric.
Hey, Jim, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we certainly welcome everyone who has stepped into the meeting today. A little bit different style than previous years. So it's been pretty enjoyable, pretty interesting up to now. We've got a couple subjects to cover today. Shannon is going to run the PowerPoint for right now, and we're going to go through a few subjects regarding material hoists, the personnel hoists, and some training. And we'll also invite some questions and some comments later. Kevin O'Shea is on as well, and we'll be speaking about the permitting of transport platforms in the state of Georgia, and just again another discussion. So with that, Shannon, you wanna start?
Yep, I'll go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things that we had been discussing as a council was coming up with guidelines for operator training. So we're not trying to put together an operator training program. We're trying to put out some industry guidelines of what items, what subjects should be covered when companies are putting together their operator training programs for either personnel hoists or material hoists. And this is set up as a some information to get the discussion started. Along the way, if you would like to bring up comments or like to add some points, this is, again, a starting point for discussion. So first bullet point that we have, if you're going to train an operator, is to talk about hazard awareness and the things that are the most important priorities to keeping safe, keeping themselves safe. All right, Shannon?
All right.
Okay, so you need to make sure that the operator understands and has responsibility for stop work. That if there's a problem, if any kind of hazards exist, that they have the ability and the authority to take the equipment out of operation. So we also think that some of the structure that's in the ANSI A10.4 standard for personnel hoists, for construction elevators, that there's a general knowledge of that ANSI standard should be part of any operator training. And again, this would change. It would be A10.5 if you're training someone on to be an operator on a material hoist. So we've gone through here just as an example, the A10.4. So you would want to know the requirements for base enclosure. What does the standard say? What's required for the base loading platform? On the landing levels, you're going to have gates, doors that interface with the elevator. What's the proper placement? How do you support those gates? That's also covered in the standard. Then you get into car clearances. So typically as you're going past the floors, you've got one clearance, but you also want to be aware and have discussions and training regarding outside potential obstructions. For instance, if you're operating on a project and people start building scaffolding next to the elevator system, what are the requirements in the ANSI standard?
And part of that, to chime in too, is there's differences depending on cars on clearances, if it's a counterweighted car or if it's a regular non-counterweighted car. You know, there are some differences there.
Right, and those are, obviously you're going to train the portions of the standard that are pertinent to the piece of equipment that you're training on. But yes, that's also covered in the standard. There's going to be requirements for buffers. Just give some basic information as to, you know, why is the car positioned the way it is at the base. Safety device. There are requirements in the standard specified for safety device. So then you get into some of the controls. You've got your normal control limits, your up, down limit switches. You may have floor stop limits. Then you also have final up and final down, and there should be some training on those final limits so that if you get into a situation where you're in the final limits, the operator isn't surprised and understands what is happening. Then the controls themselves. What is the operation? What is normal operation? What are the normal controls? And what is the ANSI standard requirement for communication with the landing levels? So then you get into the use. So you've got carrying materials. What types of materials are in the covered by the standard? Rolling equipment is covered in the standard. And what if you're mixing materials with personnel? Those are all items that are specified. Then what are the maintenance requirements? Just exposure to those items. And then inspections and tests. And the inspections and tests are going to be an important part of operator training. We do understand that. You have pre-start inspections, and some of the visual observations and inspections are important before you ever get in and turn the power on at the beginning of a shift. Okay, so those are the items that are within the ANSI standard themselves. So other training that we think should be included would be recognizing and communicating equipment deficiencies and damage. Are there any problems? Do you start to notice noises? Do you notice vibrations? Do you notice any kind of jolts or drops? Things that the elevator is doing that it hasn't been doing under normal circumstances. So recognizing and how do you react when these things are observed. Elevator car loading, of course, that's one of the more important aspects because you want to make sure that you know what the capacity is, where should the loads be placed, what types of loads are allowed in the elevator car. You also need to train that the operator is the gatekeeper. They're the last stop for preventing overloading in many cases, improper use, no exceptions to the rules. Don't let anyone cut corners. Also looking at monitoring equipment, path of the moving elevator car. Are there other components that may end up striking something as you travel up and down? So that's not something you look at once a day. That's something that needs to be monitored during the course of the day as other construction operations are possibly going on in the area of the elevators.
I see a lot of this with boom lifts. You know, I see a lot of pictures where a boom lift has moved into the path of a hoist and the hoist have struck it. And now you got people hanging from a boom lift to be rescued. You know, just the operators need to be monitoring what's going on around them.
And again, we're speaking to the scaffold industry, and there's scaffold being built inside buildings, outside buildings. So those operations may be proceeding in the area of the elevators. And so there's some coordination that's required between subcontractors, vendors, and the general contractor. And of course, one of the things that's always going to be trained is the manufacturer's operating instructions. What are specific to that particular model, that type of equipment? You need to have some sort of procedures in place for severe weather. When do you shut the machine down in high wind conditions? How do you monitor the wind conditions? Procedures for loss of power. Procedures in an emergency. Is there something else that's going on that could supersede what you're using the elevator car for? So those are all, in our opinion, those are things that should be included in operator training. Now, we're not trying to come up with a document that hits every single thing, but we're looking for some input along the way as we try to develop some sort of an industry guideline document for operator training. And we will be taking suggestions, and also we'd like to hear the comments along the way regarding whether this is something that's useful. Is it helpful for companies that may be putting together their own operator training? So we're looking for some feedback from the council and from interested members of our industry.
Yeah, I'm going to call out Sean McDonald real quick. He sent me a message, I guess, when we talked about the equipment getting in the pathway. He mentioned there was just 2 accidents in Philly about it, you know? So it is something that happens with these machines quite often.
Yeah, the user on the one was convinced that 6 inches was more than enough space between him and the moving elevator car.
You know, in the standard of 10.4, I mean, they say between material hoist and other things, you should have 10 feet of clearance.
So again, if you're providing adequate training, the operator should know when that situation arises and start talking to the other trades or the general contractor about potential hazard behavior, hazardous situations. Okay, so if any of you have some comments to bring to Shannon or myself, this is, again, a starting point. We're trying to open a discussion to put together some sort of a guideline document. Okay, Shannon, I'm going to pass it over to you for the next subject. We're going into the current status of ANSI 810.5 material hoist standard.
All right. So for a couple meetings now, and we have talked about the ANSI ASSP A10.5 standard, the safety requirement for material hoist. This standard has been in a rewrite process, and it is coming to an end. So as its current status, as of April 15, 2020, it began a recirculation ballot with all the main committee members for review of address comments of the public review. So in the standards process, you have the subcommittee and then you have the main committee. It goes out to public review and then it comes back. And any comments that are made have to be readdressed or addressed to it. And then it needs to be resubmitted to the main before it goes to publication. So as of right now, it's a 30-day voting process. And basically in this 30-day voting process, members that voted prior to public review can, 1, change their vote, 2, do nothing and original vote remains the same, remains in place, or 3, vote if their previous vote was not counted. So in the last, just to let everybody know, in the last vote of this standard, there was no negative votes. Every votes that were counted were all positive votes, affirmative, no negatives, but there are quite a few that did not vote. And so we're hoping that they're either going to vote affirmative, maybe give their suggestions for negative, or just abstain from the vote because they don't clearly have any input for the actual standard. But if everything goes through, we're looking at this standard is going to be approved and then go to editorial for publication. So hopefully by the end of the year, we're going to have a new ANSI A10.5 standard released.
And some of the comments that we did get in the original vote were of the editorial nature anyway.
Yes, they were editorial. There was very little content comments. It was mostly editorial. So with that, we wanted to talk a little bit about this and why we've been talking about this standard a little bit. This is directly from the Construction Hoist Council's web page, the goals, and this whole process started with, there was a lot of equipment out there that wasn't really governed under a material hoist standard. They were considered tools of the trade, you know. So our first thought was to develop a guidelines for special purpose hoists. That's what we were calling them because of their use. And so, but we did a little bit more. We were able to draft a document that we were able to present to the A10.5 subcommittee. People liked it, and it allowed us to make changes to the standard. So not just having a document, a guideline document, but we actually made changes to the actual standard itself. So
we were very fortunate in that process that we kept getting shot down as we attempted to get into the ANSI standard, and we were basically faced with the possibility of having to create a consensus standard of our own for the types of equipment that did not meet that original 10.5. So to be able to work within the A10 group and make modifications that would cover the existing material hoist and also the other ones that are out there in the industry was definitely something that it was beyond our expectations. It was our highest hope, I guess you'd say.
Yes. So some of these new changes, I'm just going to briefly talk about two that are really going to impact people that are here in the council and in the scaffold industry. And it has to do with special purpose hoists. And so we developed definitions. So we have the special purpose hoist. I mean, these are now been accepted into the standard. The machines are going to be part of this standard. And so a material hoist that is specifically designed and designated to be used in special applications. All right, so what are special applications? And special applications are these material hoists that has been applied as tools of the trade, you know, machines that weren't part of the standard before. There's many of the people here in the council that has these type of products, and these are the type of products that we're talking about, you know, these small material hoists. And before people get a little nervous about this, because some of the things that were in the 10.5 standard weren't really focused around these type of machines. So we did make some adjustments, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for these type of machines, you know, as a special application hoist, it follows two paths. So there's a special section in the standard, and it talks about installation of temporary structure. What we know as temporary structures are like scaffolding. You know, a lot of these machines were used during the installation of scaffolding as tools of the trade. They will still follow that path, but yet they have a home in a particular standard. So there was some states and some jurisdictions that were having problems with people using these types of equipment because they didn't have a home, you know. So we've created one for them within the standard. The next part is on these types of tools now, they're considered tools of trade during installation. And if you think about the installation of it, you have installers, authorized people installing the scaffolding, but you don't have general workers on this scaffolding. It's not until it's been installed, it's been inspected, then you allow general workers. Well, once general workers are now to access that scaffolding, then you're going to have to put in place certain things to make these pieces of equipment, if you want to leave them on the job site, comply to the rest of the standard. Okay. The other path is used on a permanent structure. I mean, there's some cases where we have pre-existing and standalone structures where you have a single user moving specific material, and we can consider that as a tool of the trade. You know, you have a roofing job where you're only moving material from the ground to the roof. In the current standard, you would have to add a whole bunch of guarding and everything that's probably not even necessary for the actual job. You have one trade using this hoist to move the material they need. The other thing with it too is to specify between a special application and a permanent structure setup, we have to limit the stopping of this machine to a two-stop system. It's only going from A to B, that's it. You're not going to all these different floors, moving a bunch of material. Only thing you're doing is moving one group's, one trade's material to one location, okay? But that's this section of special application. Now, there are some things with special applications that are omitted, and unless there is hazards to general workers, you know. So, and when we talk about these items that have been omitted, we're talking about hoistway enclosures. We're talking about base enclosures. We're talking about access to landings and the operation station and position indicators. Those are sections of the standards that during a special application, they are not needed because there's other means that are being used to protect that area during the installation of or removing of this material or installation of a scaffolding system, you know, to protect against other, the general workers from these hazards. Part of the special applications hoist, the smaller hoist, when those hoists are left on the job site, there are some things with these machines that aren't the same with the larger rack and pinion material hoist. And so with that, we were able to add another definition to this and classify some of these machines as light duty portable material hoists. And these are machines that are 1,000 pounds or less. You know, these are your smaller machines. And with that, they have special established variances within the standard for items of these machines that aren't the same as their larger counterparts, you know. So these have all been looked at, and there's a lot of us that went through all these different details to make sure that we covered, so we weren't hurting the industry by adding these into there, but helping the industry. So part of that, those variances has to include with overhead protection, car resting device, and then testing of these machines. So there's variances already established within the standard for a machine that's classified here. So another thing to add to there, so if you have a company that you install material hoist and you attach scaffolding, attach this material hoist to scaffolding, a question I have for the council is, how do you meet this section of the standard? This has always been an issue for a lot of, some places had to get special variances, you know, some places they'd have to stack the landing door, so they skip levels of the scaffolding to that. So what we
that was one of my questions. That was one of my questions I was trying to bring up. Somehow my audio got turned off. How does that apply to our typical hoist attachments for scaffold that we have like on our mast climbers? Or does it?
For a mast climber?
Well, like for instance, we've been having cranes and derricks issues with our hoist attachments that go on our mast climbers. Would these suddenly somehow fall under this standard, or does that not apply?
As far as a mast climber, I mean, are you classifying it as a material hoist?
No, he's talking about the wire rope hoists that are tied.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're talking about wire rope. No, that falls under a different standard. These are guided material hoists. Your overhead hoists, crane type hoists, those fall under the B30 standards for those applications. Those are unguided systems.
Yeah, the A10.5, everything is basically mast guided of some type.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That answers my question. That was my question. Does it have to be something mast guided? I didn't see the whole definition of the special purpose hoist, so I didn't know that that was a requirement that it was mast guided or what.
Yeah, no, that is a mast guided. If you're talking about an overhead hoist, you're talking about a B3016 overhead underhung hoist, or a winch system with a free hanging. All of it is, if you have a free hanging load on the end of a cable, it falls into those B30 standards.
Which still falls under cranes and derricks.
Cranes and derricks, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
there are different.
All right, that answered my question. I just didn't know if the special purpose title would apply to those or not. So.
No,
Carry on.
not for those, no.
Okay.
All right. So in the current standard right now, hoistway doors and gates must have a 6'6" opening to be compliant, and for many scaffolds that is difficult to do. So what we have done is we have added into a section called reduced height doors and gates. This is a practice that was done with EN standards in Europe, and we brought the concept over into the US and spoke about it because of the situation of not being able to comply when it comes to going to scaffolding fully. You know, not some scaffoldings, yes, some no. So we added the reduced height doors. We have certain requirements to it. I'm not going to go in full detail of those, but this is a new thing. And for everybody here that has material hoist that you're attaching to scaffolding, and we get the adoption from your local jurisdictions, you know, this will be very helpful for you guys to install these machines. So part of that is we have to always think about the safety of the general worker that is on the scaffolding and around it, around this machine. So if we're eliminating a full height barrier on scaffolding and we're going to a half gate, we got to at least create a landing restricted area that we kind of block people away from just accidentally walking into or reaching into the path of this hoist. So there's guidelines for this. There are some limitations to speed, you know, but it allows us to create a whole nother level with using these machines. After the publication, we would like to begin on creating an industry awareness document in the guidelines of how the new A10.5 standard for material hoist will affect the industry, because there is going to be a lot of questions. There's a lot of new things and a lot of new concepts and practices that we've introduced into this standard. We brought the standard up to what is happening day in, day out on the job sites right now with this type of equipment. So we're going to be looking for help from people to help lay this out, these guidelines and everything. After this 10.5 gets the final vote and it gets published, the ANSI ASSP, the ASSP group, the subcommittee, the A10.4 personnel hoist is going to start its new rewrite. And we plan to make some changes to it as far as the way it's laid out, like we did with the 10.5, and add things. And we're looking for feedback from the council members that may have had issues in local areas concerning sections of the current 10.4 standard. We need that feedback because the changes that has happened with the 10.5, it's all come from feedback that we've received from the council, and we brought it into a document, put it into a document, and brought it to the table of the subcommittee of the A10.5, and there has been a lot of agreement. So it all started from our council of these changes that are happening. So we'd like to do the same thing with the 10.4, get people's feedback, find out.
And Shannon, it may not even be issues with using the equipment, but there may be some of you that have looked at the standard in the past and wonder why certain things are the way they are, and perhaps don't agree with certain sections, and maybe think that there are other sections that should be elaborated and expanded. So those are all comments that as we go through the process, we'd like to come up with a very complete document that includes industry input.
And when you have these issues, we like to, along with the issue, present a possible solution. So if you found something, you know, present a solution that you might think would be feasible to correct it. That way we have something to bring, not just bring in a whole bunch of problems, but also bring in what's our solution to those problems. And then also we want, these comments, we're going to present it to the 10.4 subcommittee during the rewrite process. We're going to make sure everybody that's in our council who brings their comments and stuff, we all get heard on, because we're the ones that are using this equipment day in, day out on the job site. Make sure everybody's aware of it. So some of these things on the rewrite, I mean, maybe look at the scope, the equipment that's covered. Structural design, current allowable stress limits, types of elevation for design, you know, evaluation for design, you know, those types of things. Let's look at those if people's ran into questions or concerns, you know. Definitions, You know, it's always good, and I run into it all the time when people ask me about standards and different things. Well, what do we mean here, or what is this? You know, maybe if there's something that's not clear, let's get a definition so when somebody's reading it, understands more of what our intent of certain wording is, or what our intent of an item is, you know, in the standards. So maybe bring up some of that stuff so that we can clarify things better. You know, size of car and capacity limits. You know, right now there's a lot of talks with oversized cars, and in the 2016 version, you know, there was an increase with load cells. You can go to a larger pound per square foot, and some areas adopted it, some areas haven't. Some areas have had different concepts on how to allow oversized cars because of different items now in the industry that they're using to move these products to move with these cars. And so some of that feedback will help too, because there's some states and some areas that's had one system in place, and then they've adopted a new section of a new rewrite of a standard, and now that's totally changed what the original concept was. So some of these issues would be helpful so that we can clarify this stuff and get it more on a level field of what's actually happening in the field.
And we realize that there are a lot of entities using various versions of A10.4. So even once we're through this process, we realize that it's going to take some time for other jurisdictions to maybe allow some of the changes that are in the new document to take effect locally. So it's going to be an ongoing project to get a internet or a national document accepted nationwide.
Yes. Yeah, part of one of our goals with the Construction Hoist Council right now is to try to establish some sort of database for all these standards and which areas are accepting what. And, you know, we've had some areas, New York City's adopted new sections of the 2016 of the A10.4. You know, you have Massachusetts last year adopted sections of adopted in reference to 2016 10.4 2016 standard, but they made some changes. You know,
1 square foot. Do you want to receive invitations, send invitations, or both?
What was that?
It's under, in the screenshot, it's under I want to. Select receive invitations, send invitations, both. Receive.
Eric, did you catch that or what?
No, I think just continue. I didn't get that.
Okay.
I think it's somebody else's meeting bleeding over.
Yeah.
That's happened a couple times this week with all these webinars.
Yeah.
We're being attacked.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was a little lost there on what was being asked. All right.
You changed your voice on us.
But we're already fighting the revisions.
Yes. So there's a lot of jurisdictions that we have to get on board to accepting new changes and stuff, and that's always an ongoing process. But as far as for if
Imagine I get to do that later.
I don't know. Is it possible to?
It's Bob Brewer's mic. He's unmuted.
Yeah. Can somebody mute that?
Go ahead and mute everyone. So our speakers will have to unmute themselves.
Yeah.
Hang on just
They do according to what he said the other day.
All right. All right.
All right. I think everybody hear me okay now?
Yeah, we should be good now.
All right, good.
And if somebody
I was
has
getting a little confused here. I'm thinking somebody's asking a question, trying to figure out what it was.
if you could let us know if somebody's got a comment, we could try to unmute.
Yeah, so far no comments.
Okay.
All right, so back to what we're talking about here is now we have some other things here with types of controls permitted. You know, there's what's allowed there. If we have also Also types of anchoring to structures, inspection and certification requirements. You know, it's nice to learn a little bit more and get some feedback on what local areas are requesting for inspection and certification requirements, you know, permitting, things of that nature too.
And we're not suggesting that these items need to be changed in the revision process. We're just trying to throw some ideas out there just to get people's minds working.
Yeah, spark up something a little bit. Say, oh, you know what? I do remember we had this issue, you know, and jot it down. Let us know, you know. And then new discussions, you know, are there any new topics or courses of action that the members would like to add to the Construction Hoist Council's agenda? You know, we're getting the 10.5 is now coming to the end to where we have met that goal of increasing for special application hoists and finding a home for these types of products. You know, that's coming down. What other things could we add back into our agenda to now focus our attention to? You know, we have the 10.4, we have, what else do we have? You know, anybody have any suggestions or any ideas? Silence is good. Okay.
We may have to unmute everybody's mics again.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we could touch on, but it's just kind of a thought process that's just been thrown out. So give us a little reaction time there.
That's no problem.
One thing I'm concerned about is how does the special application hoist go back to a 9210 product? Is that going to bleed together? Or is there a now that that's been added into the 10.5, is there something in there that says this excludes 9210 machines? Is there exclusion clause in there, or is it going to somehow bleed together, or what's going to happen there?
No. See, on the 10.5 at the very beginning, it does not. The 10.5 standard does not include 9210 machines. That's
what I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought. There was an exclusion at the first of the standard, correct?
Yes. So there's exclusion at the first of the standard. The only thing the special application does now is brings in those smaller material hoists that have been used in the field. And I mean, with past experience, I have spent a lot of time writing letters and stuff for a product that I used to deal with that many people have, and it never really had a true home. It was kind of in the between of two standards, you know, in its design, but it was a tool of the trade because it was used for the installation of scaffolding. So there was they had to get approvals with different jurisdictions, you know. Now we actually have, for that type of product, there's actually a home for it now. You know, there's a standard, there's variances, clauses for the use of this machine, where it's not going to affect the industry, but help the industry of giving it an actual place marker, you know, of where it belongs.
Managers and scaffold companies have been asking for this for a long time. It's just been a long process to get to this point, to where we had I guess it was just the timing was correct, that we could cooperate with the A10 main committee and get our subcommittee members in.
Right. Well, I agree. I think it's a great thing. I think it's a great thing to be moving forward with. I'm just not as up to date on it as I wish I was, but at the same time, I don't carry hoist in my fleet, so I'm mainly here because of how it bleeds into transport platforms and so on. So
sure.
I'm kind of behind the power curve, but at the same time, I'm in the curve. So
yeah, if there's people on board at all, it will not meet any part of this standard.
Right.
Except for installation and dismantling. Then that's the only time.
Installation, dismantle, and inspections. That's the only time.
Right.
It's not designed for riders.
Emergency egress as well.
So I hate to go backwards on something, but I had been muted and didn't realize it earlier when I was trying to ask the question. When we're talking about training standards, Is this a document maybe we should put together for other products as well, like the A9210 machines? Suggested training material, or are we still going to move forward with more of a training document there?
Well, I'm not sure about that from the transport platform perspective. The idea had been discussed probably within the last 12 months regarding some sort of standardized training for operators. And instead of trying to get into too many specifics, we kind of felt that a starting point would be to put subject matter that there's guidelines. It's suggested that you put these subject matter items these items be included in your training, and then develop specific training for your company, but based on some of the information that has been suggested by an industry group.
I agree. That's in my opinion, the best way to attack it. I'm not necessarily going to tell you how to train your people, but here's the topic lines you need to utilize. I think that should be an industry standard. You know, everyone should know about weather conditions and pathways and so on and so forth, like we talked about earlier.
Well, just put this in the same too, James. Just think about it. See, right now, currently, you don't have material hoists in your fleet, you know, but that doesn't mean that someday you might want to include that into your fleet. Well, with a guide like this of what the basic minimum training things to
I agree.
That would be helpful to you that's starting into this, or anybody else in the council that is listening in and looking at pursuing this, or even with personnel hoists. What are guidelines, things that I should be thinking about that aren't really familiar with this industry, you know?
And
right. Oh, I agree. It's a great tool, and I agree that it's something we need. And actually that's what I'm saying is it is such a good idea. Can we look at the same type of thing for other standards that we're all involved in?
Yeah, and I think that's
same type of document.
James, I think that's correct. That you know, we had been talking about putting together training, I guess a more complete training program, and so I think it's up to the council to decide when it comes to transport platforms whether we want something that's more specific, or whether, you know, this I would call this kind of a generalized document, because we are saying this is our suggestion for the materials that should be covered by any operator training program. And we could definitely drop back and do that with transport platforms. Or do we as a group want to be more specific in that form of training? And so those are subjects for discussion as we move forward. You know, as a council, we're part of the Scaffold and Access Industry Association, and we're trying to, you know, find our way into what provides value to our industry. You know, we want to provide expertise. We want to provide some leadership. So where are our resources going to be the most valuable? So again, it's not up to the leadership here. That's why we really need input. So we're throwing these documents out here, these ideas, just to get everybody's minds rolling, so that we can come up with those answers as to what provides the greatest value to the time and talent resources that we're using.
Hey, Eric, it's Mike Pitt from Mass Climbers.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, IPAF have developed their training course for the operators, and I don't know whether anybody's read that, but I mean, does that meet some of your bullet points that you put together as what should be included in the training?
That meets, I would say that meets quite a few of the bullet points. You know, I don't know if it spends, I haven't looked at it recently to know whether it focuses on some of what I would consider the top priorities with the A10.4 standard, because I definitely think that the people in the field realize there's a standard and these are rules, that it's helpful. It gives them a better level of confidence. For instance, if somebody says you're the gatekeeper, you have to do these certain things, it's your responsibility. If they know that there are these rules, the ANSI standard behind what they're doing, I think it gives them another level of confidence. But you know, I'm not suggesting that we try to move away from any kind of IPAF training.
No, but I mean, you know, so the committee can focus on the things like you're doing as far as the ANSI standards. Would it not be sort of a good idea just to adopt the training and to develop the IPAF course and bring that on board so that we can all use the same training course?
Well, again, that's why we're having this discussion, because we're looking for that type of input, Mike.
Yeah. Well,
So I think it's a
it
great
would be a good
suggestion.
idea.
I don't know. I think the IPAF, the IPAF training didn't go over as well with the mass climbers as we had all hoped it to, and it just never seemed to ever iron out to where it worked good stateside.
Well, I think you'll
So
find.
I don't know how
James, I think that
I
was
don't know
really
how good or
down to
bad that would be.
I think that was individuals rather than the course. I think the course.
It may very well have been. I don't know.
And
It may very well have been.
Yeah, and I believe that the adoption of the mass climbing course into the SIA is pretty much going ahead, and I think that's something that we should look at in more detail.
Just to jump in here real quick, John Royer has his hand raised. John, do you still have a comment that you'd like to throw out here?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. So this kind of goes back to the beginning when we were talking about like the guidelines for operator training and stuff. But and I believe there was a comment made that we didn't want to go down the road necessarily at this point for training. And I'd like to share with you guys something that happened years ago when I worked for the Waco branch in Denver. But at the time we had like 2 material hoists and a personnel hoist. And back then, I'm not sure if this is happening throughout other parts of the country, but the city and county of Denver required a licensed operator, whether it was on a material hoist or a personnel hoist. And then part of that deal was they had to go down there, recertify, take their test. We had to necessarily show them how to operate our hoist. But then the end game came back around when the city and county of Denver wanted to send their elevator inspector out to actually do an inspection on the elevator and watch the drop test. And most of these guys did not understand the ANSI standard, nor did they understand how the hoist operated. And I remember a situation where we had one inspector come out and, the personnel hoist we had, obviously the governor had to reach 210 feet per minute before it locked in and tripped. The elevator traveled 150. So we would put this into the free fall condition. He wanted to see this hoist drop test 3 times. On the 3rd time, we snapped the pinion gear. And, it was just something that we kept going back and forth with. The inspectors didn't know what they were looking at, but because of working in that jurisdiction, we had to. So I'm thinking if we did explore the realm of actually putting behind the industry an operator's training course, that maybe we could reach out to some of these local entities like City and County of Denver, or if it happens other places, to help kind of network like we do with OSHA, was bringing their inspectors in. And look, this is a different type of equipment than what's in your building. And so therefore it has some different needs. So that's my comment.
Hey, John, I appreciate it. There have been many jurisdictions that I've gone into, especially when you get into some of the counties that provide elevator permitting and elevator inspection. And you'll literally have to get a copy of the standard and give it to the guys that are either the managers or the inspector, so they have something to judge your equipment by, because it's not unusual for them to have no idea what it is that they're looking at. And so, if they're relying on themselves to make sure it's working properly, we're probably in trouble. So thank goodness, that there's a level of training on the equipment side in our industry that keeps us from getting into trouble there.
I have this talk a lot about elevator inspectors inspecting this type of product and the knowledge that they have to govern under the standard this is under. Because in the 2016 version of the 10.4, there's a section in the back for inspections it's a should, it's not a shall, it's a should be inspected by a QEI. And so I have brought up a lot of discussion with different individuals on, well, what guarantees that this QEI from the local area is familiar with this type of equipment. Right now for a QEI, they understand the A17-1 and they have experience, and they test out, they get their QEI license. And then at that point, they do their continuing education. But for them to actually inspect one of these machines, they should have some sort of extra schooling on 10.4. But right now, in the way it's set up, is there is no. My suggestion was create an endorsement program for QEI. Say, hey, you know, if on the same concept, if I drive a car, you know, I have a Class E license. You know, if I want to drive a bus, haul children, I have to have a Class B, or if I want to drive a tractor trailer, I have to have a Class A. It all requires extra training at that level to say, hey, we are qualified to inspect this, you know? So I've been voicing my opinion about that to different people in the elevator side. I don't think some of them like it, but hey, it's one of these things that local jurisdictions are wanting to have QEIs, elevator inspectors, inspect a product that they're not even familiar with. And to me, a QEI inspecting a piece of equipment that's installed is the last line of defense that, hey, this thing was properly done. You know, and if they don't know what they're looking at, then we have big issues.
Well, I know owners and contractors, if they think it's been inspected by a QEI, they feel like now it's certified and it's safe. And that's not necessarily true. And we all know that.
It's Kevin here. One of the main obstacles that we face with the adoption of any standard post 10.4's adoption or relinquishing by OSHA in 1970, right? Anything from that point on is about a fight many times with jurisdictions on a definition of a conveyance, definition of a goods hoist, definition. This is where the inspectors don't have an option, because the state or the regulatory body that they represent has made a determination that something that does X, Y, and Z is a conveyance. And if it's a conveyance, there's a publicly adopted standard that says we must inspect this conveyance to this standard. And that's where a lot of this fight is going to be, and where it has been is in the definitions that the state or the regulatory body apply, which then basically pushes inspectorates out there to inspect equipment that they may not be familiar with, but which meets their definition as it is in the standard or in the book. And that's where that's where a big challenge is in this.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that. You're exactly right. Hey, while we've got you here, and we're kind of on the subject of QEI and inspections, would you want to say a few comments? I know I spoke with you about the state of Georgia several years ago. I know they moved their elevator bureau from the Department of Labor over to fire safety. So you've got a lot of the same people, but they're working in a different department. And there's been a lot of discussion about the use of transport platforms in the state of Georgia, and you know, what are the requirements for permitting? What are we having to do, and where or when are we anticipating additional changes? Is that something you can kind of start us on, Kevin?
Sure. There are probably there are 4 updates that I think I'd want to make everyone aware of. The first one, and I know that I've discussed it previously, I think, but I don't know if I discussed it generally. I know that I've covered the subject with a few people in the industry, but I want to make sure that everybody understands the current position of Washington State. Washington State originally, and we can go back to the days of a famous Miss Ornestes, who I'm sure you remember, Eric, and a few others remember,
yes.
Who basically concluded that the transport platform was a pariah and it would never be in the state, and you know, all these other wonderful phrases that were used. And we've progressed on from there now, and to the point where the state inspectorate have basically said that they are not now responsible for transport platforms. The reason is primarily, I think, a political one. I had a big old meeting up there some time ago, and in the middle of the meeting, they telephoned one of their legal people, and they had a look at their state regulations, and It turned out they didn't have jurisdiction on it. And that led to then they handed it across to OSHA, state OSHA, who kind of said, well, you know, we don't really care about it too much, except that if there's something that happens on any of them, we may go and investigate. And so at the moment, what we have now today in Washington State is that there is equipment up in Washington State that has not been inspected because there's now no requirement to inspect it. But there's a happy relationship with the local OSHA who like to come out and look at it and just talk to people. And they don't really inspect or do anything, but they understand that it's a new piece of equipment. And at the moment, it seems to be unchallenged. So that's where we currently are in Washington State. I had a conversation recently with Ralph Dillman, who is the head of Maryland Inspectorate. There were a couple of skirmishes in Maryland just recently. And so the email discussion that I then subsequently had with him resulted in him coming back to me on email and stating that since they have not adopted the standard, Maryland has no inspection requirements for transport platforms. If anybody needs a copy of that email, they can have it. But it was nice of them to come back and say that. The next one is Oklahoma. Oklahoma decided some time ago that they didn't like the transport platform. I'll cut a long story short, but I have a friend who has a friend who has a friend who went to school with the new governor of Oklahoma, resulting in a meeting with the head of the inspectorate, with myself and the brother of the governor coming in to try and help me along. And as you can imagine, the meeting was slightly different than it had been previously. The one thing I can tell you is that the state legal team agreed in that meeting to forward the 9210 for public adoption. That meeting was actually set to take place on the 25th of March. Well, you know it didn't take place. But I did talk to legal counsel for the state yesterday by email, and he said that the meeting is being rearranged and there are no ulterior comments, and he can see that that will be adopted when the public meeting takes place. Okay, we don't know when the public meeting will be yet, but that's obviously good news that they're going to adopt 9210. And the last one is Georgia. I talked to Ben Crawford, who is the chief engineer for Georgia, yesterday, and he said that, and as I've said already in previous meetings, they, as a committee, as a board, and I was on the Georgia State Elevator Board at the time, we voted to adopt 9210. That had to be ratified by a public meeting. Ben has said that it's in for the public meeting. The public meeting has not been arranged yet because of COVID-19, but he said that it will be formally tabled in the public meeting for adoption in the state of Georgia. So that's an update on 4 of the states out there.
Okay, so at this point, Kevin, the transport platforms in the state of Georgia still have to go through the elevator permitting board, right? The bureau.
They do, and I'm not sure what they're going to do with it when they adopt 9210 yet. I don't know if anybody is, but at the moment what you have to do is generally you just have to apply for a variance, which is something that's been done on numerous occasions now, and it doesn't seem to be, there doesn't seem to be any impediment in the process. Recently, one of our rental facilities applied for a variance for the Vogel power station, and it went through easily, and it wasn't built to type. It wasn't, you know, it was very much an unusual type of situation down on the job. The inspector came out, very amicable, realised that it was a special build, a special application, was flexible, and everything was fine. There's a good perception of the transport platform beginning to start there in Georgia. I think once they pass 9210, whether in fact it goes through the process or not, I think there will still be a set of conditions that they will apply in addition to 9210. I think they will insist on a roof, and I think they will insist on full height base enclosure. But I don't know that that's a real problem anyway. If they do adopt 9210 and therefore inspect to the letter of 9210, if those additionals are in there, I don't see that that's going to be a huge big deal.
And
what about licensing? Are they going to require a license to do transport platforms?
Again,
I know that Georgia currently requires an elevator license to put up an elevator, correct?
yes, they do, and I'm not sure if it's going to change or not. The other thing that he did tell me yesterday was, and there, you're right, it transferred into the fire engineering and safety department, which currently does not have a commissioner. And until they appoint the new commissioner, until Ben then begins a conversation with the commissioner, you know, it's up in the air as to what's going to happen to that process. But what I can tell you is this. Yes, James, at the moment, they do require to be a licensed contractor. In order to do that, you have to have a qualifier. That qualifier has to pass the Georgia State exam. I know people who've passed the Georgia State exam who I wouldn't have thought would have passed it. It's not that difficult, apparently. And it's not that difficult to arrange either. Once that's passed, you become the qualifier. Your company automatically becomes a contractor because you have that qualifier. And it's really not that much of an onerous process once you get into it. It'd be nice if we could streamline it, but I think that's going to depend on A, formally adopting 9210, which clarifies a lot, and then B, what the new commissioner's judgment is going to be on what that equipment will be at that point. You know, at the end of the day, we're talking with these regulators and with many jurisdictions about a 10.4 that was plagiarized from a 17.1, right? And that's a real problem, right? It has been a problem for years. So, you know, yeah, okay, I hope there's a lot of clarification coming through on some of the work that's being done right now with this committee and other work that's going on. But at the end of the day, we still have to convince them that it's not a conveyance, right? We still have to convince them to look at what they're doing from a political side or from a higher regulatory side than the inspector who turns up on the job site. And I think that's the work that's cut out for us as we go forward now. You know.
And you said they're waiting for acceptance of the standard, and it takes, is it a public meeting that
Yeah. Both Oklahoma and Georgia are both saying the same thing right now, which is the standard has been promoted for, or has been supported onto the agenda of the public meeting. And the public meeting then will be the final adopting body for the document. And
okay.
According to Daniel Mayers, who is the legal counsel for Oklahoma, for instance, he said to me that you know, there are very few, if any, ever public comments for a technical document such as this. Then, you know, the public meeting and comments are more to do with the realities of life in Oklahoma rather than, you know, anybody who's got a problem with the adoption of a technical document. So he said they don't foresee problems with that.
Okay. All right. I don't know. Does anyone have any questions over some of what Kevin covered?
All right. I guess I'll move on to the next. The next item that we have is presentations for the annual convention 2020. Anybody have any ideas or any suggestions?
I know in the past we have listened to some pretty good project presentations, and I find those enjoyable. Maybe people that in general scaffold industry wouldn't. I'm not sure, but I'm always looking for a good project wrap up, interesting applications, for instance.
I like Eric's idea.
All right. This is also a subject that Shannon and I will be open for taking comments if you guys have some ideas on maybe something that has not been done before. And it doesn't have to be construction hoist related either. So yeah, definitely throw your ideas at us. Let us hear what it is you might find interesting.
All right, with that, we're going to go on to the next. And if are there any other questions or anything that people want to comment about the Construction Hoist Council or anything? Anybody have anything? All right, silence is good. I guess we're covering everything pretty good, Eric.
All right. Hopefully we're giving everybody something to think about for
Yes.
meetings and future subjects for moving forward.
Yeah. And I do want to thank everybody on the 10.5 from everybody in the council, everybody that's put work into it. It's a lot of what has been done, and there's a lot of changes that has been made, and bringing that standard up to what we're doing day to day now in the present day. I look forward to getting people's comments and stuff on the 10.4 so we can bring that one up to speed too, to what's happening day in and day out. So thank you, everybody. And one more thank you is thank you for allowing the Construction Hoist Council to be the most hit page. So.
Thank you, Shannon and Eric. Well done.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it looks like people are viewing our webpage. So that probably means we need to spend some more time putting additional information. We've got some articles and we've got some documents. I think we can always add more and probably put some more equipment photos and applications as well, just for educational purposes.
Yeah,
honestly, I wouldn't love myself too much with those numbers. People are only looking because they can't go to the zoo. I'm sure that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also, we've talked in all the different councils, people looking for more photos and stuff. Eric and I, we've talked before in the past, we'd like to get more photos of personnel hoists and material hoists of all different types with different installations, so we can post them on our page and stuff to show different aspects, different layouts and stuff. We're all out here doing this type of work, and we all have our unique jobs and our different things, and it'd be nice to see what everybody's doing and how people are accomplishing these different goals and reaching these different tasks and stuff.
How would you like to receive those?
Eric, what do you think? Do you think maybe email them into us and we can?
Yeah, email is good. I mean, if you call us, then we can make sure you've got our current addresses. Shannon's got a new email address.
Yes, I have a new email, so please update that. I think our emails are on the web page as well, so that should be our current contacts.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody's attending today. That ends the information that we had prepared, and look forward to hearing from all of you as we move through this year and into next.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate your help.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Eric.
Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, see you guys in a couple of hours for Mass Climbers.
We'll take a short break and we'll leave it open. If y'all would like to chat, we'll reconvene at 3 p.m. Central Time.
For Mass Climbers?
For AWP/MEWP Council.